Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into a flawless crime. Crushed by Poirot's mind, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Invitation with No Return. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, scented faintly with lilac and sealed with an unfamiliar wax crest. Poirot studied it under the bright winter light of his London apartment. "Curious," he murmured. "An invitation to an estate I do not know, from a woman I have never met. And yet, it feels like a summons." The paper crackled like distant thunder in his fingers. As he broke the seal, his eyes flicked across the words, and for a moment they narrowed, not in confusion, but in calculation. That evening, the sky above Devon darkened early, smothered by a rolling sea of storm clouds. Wind curled through the trees like a whispered warning. Styles Edge Manor emerged through the mist like a relic of something half forgotten, its turrets sharp against the gloom, its windows glowing amber in the approaching night. As Poirot stepped out of the hired car, the gravel crunched too loudly underfoot, and the silence that followed felt deliberate. A tall figure waited at the door, James Foyle, the butler, straight-backed and bloodless as marble. "Monsieur Poirot, we were told you might not come." "And yet I am here," Poirot said gently. "Curiosity is a powerful thing, Mr. Foyle." Inside, the manor smelled of old wood, wax, and something floral that barely concealed the tension in the air. The guests had already gathered in the drawing room, a cozy space now thick with unease despite the crackling fire. 7 faces turned toward him, some startled, some unreadable. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, the hostess, was first to greet him. She was tall, once beautiful, with the presence of someone used to commanding attention. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I wasn't sure who else to turn to." "And yet you turn to a detective, madame?" Poirot asked, eyes twinkling. "Because something terrible is going to happen," she said simply. "Or perhaps it already has." Her hand trembled as she reached for a glass of sherry. Before Poirot could reply, a tall man with silver hair and hawk-like features stepped forward. "Forgive Eleanor," he said. "My wife has always had a dramatic streak. I'm Richard Ashcombe." Poirot inclined his head. "The husband who did not send the invitation?" Ashcombe hesitated. "No, that would be my sister-in-law, Beatrice." At that name, a younger woman near the hearth stiffened, her fingers tightening around a book she had not been reading. Poirot observed this, but said nothing. Within the hour, dinner was served. The table stretched long beneath a dripping chandelier, shadows pooling behind every guest. Conversation was strained. Jokes died mid-air. Poirot noted the way Lady Eleanor avoided her husband's gaze and the way Beatrice smiled at Richard when she thought no one was watching. It was not until dessert that the atmosphere cracked. A scream rang through the manor, shrill, shattering. James the butler rushed in, pale. "Forgive me, sir, but Miss Carroway, she's collapsed. In the library." Poirot stood first, his napkin fluttering like a white flag. They hurried down the hall, footsteps echoing like gunfire on the polished floor. Inside the library, the fire had died, and so had Clara Caraway. She lay slumped in a reading chair, head tilted oddly, eyes wide open. Poirot knelt beside her. No blood, no wounds, no sign of struggle. "A stroke?" whispered Lady Eleanor, clutching the door frame. "Or something more deliberate," Poirot murmured, lifting a delicate porcelain teacup from the side table. Madame Caraway never drank her tea with honey, and yet here we have a smear of something sweet on the rim. A low gasp filled the room. Beatrice spoke first. "That's absurd. She was perfectly fine just an hour ago." Poirot did not reply immediately. His eyes swept the room. Books slightly out of alignment, a footstool shifted a few inches off from its usual place, and a torn edge of envelope in the hearth's ashtray. "Who last spoke with her?" he asked quietly. Richard Ashcombe cleared his throat. "I did. Around 6. We discussed the inheritance. Briefly, she was upset." "About what?" "About who would get Styles' Edge when Eleanor and I—" He faltered. "I see," Poirot said. "So Clara had reason to suspect she would be written out of the will," Beatrice interjected sharply. "Are you accusing my cousin of something? Of provoking her own death?" Poirot stood. "I accuse no one. I only observe." But the room's silence had turned heavier. Already he could feel suspicion twisting like smoke through the manor. That night, as the storm broke in full, Poirot stood at his window, watching lightning crawl across the moors. "Someone is playing a careful game," he murmured to himself. Clara Caraway was the first move, but not the last. His fingers tapped the glass. "The invitation was for me, yes, but not to prevent a murder. None. To witness it." The next morning, Styles' Edge felt colder. Clara's body had been taken to the village morgue, but the shadow of death lingered. Breakfast was quiet. Too quiet. Poirot noticed the maid, Anna, kept glancing toward the hallway. When he gently asked her if she had seen anything unusual the night before, she hesitated. I saw Miss Beatrice leaving the library just before Miss Caraway was found. She looked angry." Beatrice denied this with a cold smile. "Anna is mistaken. I was in the music room with Richard. Weren't we, darling?" Richard nodded, though not without a flicker of something, hesitation, guilt. Poirot stored it all away. Later that day, Poirot asked to see the guest records. James the butler handed them over, a slim ledger in immaculate handwriting. But one line caught his eye, a scribbled-out name under Tuesday's arrivals. Someone had been expected and didn't arrive, or perhaps, he thought grimly, they arrived under another name. Poirot requested a walk through the estate. He noted the old well sealed near the stables, the greenhouse with its cracked glass, and the overgrown maze, whose gate was left open. He stepped inside, tracing the winding path, until he found a single object tucked behind a yew hedge, a woman's silk glove, damp, torn, stained faintly red. He held it up to the light. So, the story deepens. When he returned, he found a note slid under his door. The handwriting was rushed. "Leave Styles' Edge tonight. You're not welcome here." Poirot only smiled. "The killer grows nervous. Bon. That means they know I am close." That evening, he gathered the household in the drawing room. Shadows danced on the walls as the fire crackled. Poirot stood in the center, hands clasped. "Madame, Monsieur, I believe the death of Clara Caraway was no accident. I believe someone feared her knowledge, and I believe she intended to reveal it to me this very weekend." Lady Eleanor turned pale. "But why? What did she know?" Poirot looked at her with sadness. Something she discovered in this very house. Perhaps in a letter, perhaps in a will, perhaps in a photograph. Beatrice stood sharply. "This is ridiculous." Poirot met her gaze. "Is it? You were the only one unaccounted for during the exact time Clara was alone. Your relationship with Richard was, how shall we say, more intimate than is proper for in-laws. Clara knew, and perhaps she threatened to tell Eleanor." Beatrice's eyes shimmered. "You don't know anything." "Oh, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "I know that the honey placed in Clara's tea was laced with digitalis. I know that the glove found in the maze is yours. I know that you, and not Richard, sent the invitation in Eleanor's name." Gasps erupted. "You knew Poirot would come," he continued. "You wanted him here not to solve a murder, but to frame one." She backed away. "You can't prove—" Poirot raised a hand. "There is one more thing. The torn envelope in the fireplace. Clara was holding it when she died, half burned, but the other half remained in the grate, and her fingerprints are not the only ones upon it." He turned toward Richard Ashcombe. "And yours, monsieur. Yours are on it as well." Richard's face crumpled. She found out about Beatrice and me. She threatened to tell Eleanor. I tried to reason with her. I never meant—" "Non, monsieur," Poirot interrupted softly. "You did not kill her, but you knew who did, and you helped cover it up." Beatrice sank to her knees, sobbing. Poirot looked toward the fire. A crime that seemed flawless, undone by love, fear, and a single smear of honey. The room fell into a silence so complete it felt sacred. Outside, the storm had passed. Only the ticking of the mantel clock remained. Poirot turned toward the window, his silhouette cast long across the floor. "Ah," he whispered to himself, "even the most perfect invitation cannot guarantee the guest will leave, especially when the house itself is stained with secrets." And somewhere deep in Styles' Edge, a clock began to chime. 12 slow, heavy bells, the hour of truth, and Poirot, once again, had arrived just in time. Chapter 2. A teacup too clean. The teacup sat in the center of the tray, gleaming, spotless, and untouched. No lipstick mark, no ring of sugar residue, not even the faintest hint of steam. For a house still echoing with the weight of last night's tragedy, it was the one object that dared to be perfect. And to Hercule Poirot, that perfection was far too loud. "Strange," he said aloud, his voice barely disturbing the morning quiet of Styles' Edge. "The lady is dead, and yet someone has gone to great lengths to ensure her teacup looks as if it was never used." He did not touch it. He merely looked, hands behind his back, eyes narrowing as the weak sunlight trickled across the carpet. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," he thought to himself, "you would have dismissed it. No? A simple accident, a misplaced dish, but a murder. It speaks, and sometimes it does so by being too silent." Poirot turned as Anna the maid entered, startled by his presence in the parlor so early. "Forgive me, monsieur," she said, clutching a tray of silver polish. "I thought the room was empty." "Indeed, mademoiselle, and it was entirely too empty. Tell me, was it you who cleaned the tea service after Madame Carraway's collapse?" "No, sir. I haven't touched it. I didn't dare." "Then who did?" Anna faltered. I don't know. Perhaps James or Miss Beatrice." Poirot nodded gently, eyes returning to the tray. "Tell me, Anna." "Madame Carraway drank Earl Grey. Yes, always with lemon, never milk. Of course. Poirot's eyes flicked toward the saucer. No wedge, no peel, no trace. And yet again, this teacup is silent. It has been made to forget. He left the parlor with purpose, his patent leather shoes tapping sharply down the corridor. The household was stirring, but no one was at ease. The murder of Clara Caraway had cut deep, deeper than appearances allowed. And now he suspected the killer was tidying the crime scene, polishing away the evidence with the same care Anna reserved for the silver. He found Richard Ashcombe in the study, bent over paperwork he barely pretended to read. "You have heard the morning news, monsieur?" Poirot asked, voice light. "If you mean that my cousin's body lies in the village morgue and that my wife has barely spoken a word all morning, then yes, I've heard. And yet you read the paper. Because if I don't, I will scream." Poirot nodded. "And did you also wash the tea service from last night?" Richard blinked. "Why on earth would I do that?" "Someone did. It was too clean, as though someone hoped I would see nothing. I suppose James might have—" "James has been with this family 27 years. He would not disturb a scene he suspects to be criminal." "Non, monsieur. The cleaning was not for neatness. It was to hide something. A second cup, perhaps. A drop of something not meant for the tongue." Richard pushed back from the desk. "I didn't touch the tea, Poirot. If you're implying, I imply nothing. I ask only." Poirot moved toward the window. The morning mist was lifting, revealing the frozen garden, like a painting, in negative. "But I must wonder, monsieur, why was Clara here at all? She had not visited in over 3 years. She was family." "She was leverage," Poirot said softly. Richard turned pale. "What are you suggesting?" "I suggest, monsieur, that Clara Caraway had knowledge, and that knowledge frightened someone enough to kill her." Richard swallowed hard. "You're making enemies in this house, Poirot." "Then I must tread carefully," he said, turning. "Fortunately, my shoes are very small." As Poirot stepped into the corridor, he was met by Beatrice, her arms folded, eyes sharp. "You think you're clever," she said, voice low. "I do not think, mademoiselle. I observe. You're wrong about me, about Richard, about all of it." "I am wrong often," he agreed, "but I am precise about my errors." She stepped closer. "Clara had been writing letters, you know, dozens, to someone she would not name." "Ah," Poirot said, lifting a brow. "And yet she told you." Beatrice hesitated. "No," Poirot smiled thinly. "She did not. You read her letters after she died. You searched her room." Beatrice flinched. "I wanted to understand." "You wanted to know what she had found," he said, "and what she intended to do with it. Clara was vindictive. She wanted to ruin this family. She was murdered. That is already ruin enough." Poirot walked away, leaving her breathless and shaking. Her story was cracking, but not yet crumbled. He needed more, and that meant revisiting the only place in Styles Edge that had not yet been touched, the attic. The climb was steep, the air thick with dust and disuse. But Poirot's eye caught what others would miss: a broken lock on a cedar chest, a forgotten box pushed behind an armoire. Inside, he found papers, letters, indeed, but not from Clara. These were to her, from someone signed only M. He read quickly, frowning. The tone was desperate, pleading. "Please, not yet. They cannot know, I beg of you." Poirot's brow furrowed. So, she was blackmailing someone, and someone she loved, perhaps. He closed the box and descended. In the hall, he was met by Lady Eleanor, hollow-eyed, lips pale. "She wasn't always cruel, you know," she said suddenly. "Clara, she used to laugh like a girl." Poirot inclined his head. "It is often those who laugh most who carry the darkest burdens." "She hated me," Eleanor whispered. "Did she? Or did she pity you?" Eleanor blinked. "What do you mean?" "Your marriage, madame. It is a cage lined in silk." Eleanor stared, then looked away. "Why are you here, Monsieur Poirot?" "Truly, to bring order to chaos," he said simply. "Then you'll fail. This house was born from chaos." That night Poirot stood before the fire, thinking. The letters, the cup, the polished tray. Each piece pointed not to passion, but to planning. Clara had been silenced, not in rage, but in fear. And the second teacup, missing still, must have held the truth. It was near midnight when he returned to the kitchen. There he found James polishing silver. Quiet, watchful. "You are loyal, no?" Poirot asked him. "To the family, yes. And yet sometimes to be loyal is to say nothing, even when everything is burning." James did not speak. Poirot held up a second cup, found hidden behind the bread box. "This, I think, is the one Clara drank from." James stiffened. "Milk," Poirot said. "Clara never took milk, and yet the rim, still faint with it." James lowered his gaze. "I didn't wash that one. I hid it." "Why?" "Because Miss Eleanor asked me to." Ah, there it was, the twist. Poirot returned to Eleanor's chamber. She was waiting. "You found it?" "Yes." She sighed. "It wasn't me, I swear. I thought it was Beatrice. I thought she would be blamed. So I hid the cup, to give her time." "But now I must ask," Poirot said gently. "Time for what?" Eleanor looked up, tears glistening. "To run. To leave this house and never come back. Because I loved her once. And she loved Richard. But Clara knew. And Clara was going to expose everything." Poirot nodded. "So you tried to protect her?" "And failed." In the drawing room, he gathered them once more. The family, the staff, the suspects. The truth had to be given light. "There were 2 teacups," he began. "One too clean, one hidden. Clara drank from the one meant for another. The poison, digitalis again, was not for her." Gasps. "It was for Beatrice." Beatrice turned white. "Someone feared what she might do, or say, or become." Richard stepped forward. "Who? Who would do such a thing?" Poirot's gaze rested on James the butler. "Ah, monsieur, you tried to be invisible, but you wrote the letters, did you not?" James's hands trembled. "M," Poirot continued. "Short for Malcolm. Your real name. You loved Beatrice once. She left you for Richard. But Clara discovered the truth, that you had returned, that you still burned with it." James broke. "I didn't mean to kill Clara. I meant only to stop Beatrice, just enough to scare her. I didn't think Clara would—" "You made a plan, monsieur." But plans unravel. The room fell into shocked silence. Poirot turned, watching the firelight dance. "A teacup," he said softly, "can be clean, but never truly empty. It remembers. And so do I." As the manor's grandfather clock struck 1, Poirot stepped into the hallway, shadows falling around him like old regrets. The crime was solved, but the wound it left behind would not heal so easily. He paused, glancing back only once. "It is not the poison," he whispered. "It is the fear before the sip that tells you the truth of the heart." Chapter 3. He died without a sound. The body lay in the conservatory, beneath a canopy of orchids that dripped with dew like tears. No blood, no scream, not even the scratch of furniture disturbed. Just silence, deafening, unnatural silence, as if the world had held its breath the moment he died. Lady Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth when she found him, but no sound came from her lips either, as though the stillness demanded its own respect. Poirot arrived just moments later, summoned not by alarm, but by intuition. Something in the manner's rhythm had gone wrong, a tempo broken, and Poirot, master of patterns, had always known when the song of life skipped a beat. "So," he murmured, stepping into the lush room filled with filtered light and trembling petals. "Another has departed. And again, too clean, too quiet, too soon." The dead man was Charles Redwick, a guest of vague purpose and slippery charm, a financier by reputation, but no one seemed to know exactly what he financed. His hands were folded in his lap, head tilted as if in thought, and yet he was gone, not asleep, not faint, but utterly, peacefully dead. Poirot bent low, studying the expressionless face. There were no signs of a struggle. The tie was straight, the watch still ticked faintly on his wrist, but the teacup beside him, that once again betrayed a perfection too precise. Poirot did not touch it. He only observed a slight discoloration in the rim, a residue where none should be. He turned to the gathered household: Lady Eleanor, Richard Ashcombe, Beatrice, the butler James, and now a new arrival, Dr. Nathaniel Rhodes, a local physician who had arrived that morning for a routine visit, or so he claimed. "Doctor," Poirot said softly, "you examined the body?" "I did," Rhodes replied, eyes steady behind round spectacles. "There is no wound. No signs of poison that I can detect. No broken vessels in the eyes. No froth at the mouth. I suspect heart failure." Poirot gave a small smile. "And yet, monsieur, you carry no medical bag. You arrived with a cane, a book, and gloves. Strange attire for one expecting illness." Rhodes's lips tightened. "I did not anticipate a corpse." "Indeed," Poirot said, stepping back. "And yet death is so often anticipated by those who cause it." Suspicion circled like vultures. Lady Eleanor turned sharply. "Surely you don't suspect Dr. Rhodes?" "Madame," Poirot said, "I suspect everyone until reason allows otherwise." The guests were rattled. Charles Redwick had been charming but enigmatic. He had flirted with Beatrice, argued softly with Richard, and seemed to carry secrets wherever he walked. Poirot had observed him only the day before, scribbling notes in a slim notebook he kept in his inside coat pocket. That notebook was now gone. Poirot left the conservatory, mind ticking. Redwick had arrived late to Styles Edge after Clara Carraway's death. He claimed to be an old acquaintance of Richard, but Richard had introduced him as a business contact. And yet, no business had been discussed. Only wine, only secrets. Poirot felt the hidden threads drawing tight. He returned to his room to reflect, watching rain streak the windows like veins across glass. There are two kinds of murderers, he thought, those who act in rage and those who prepare a place for death to sit. This, mon ami, is the second kind. Still, careful, perfect, until the flaw reveals itself. Later that evening, Poirot wandered the halls and found James the butler speaking in hushed tones with Anna. They stopped the moment he approached. "Forgive me," James said, voice stiff. "We were only discussing dinner service." Poirot smiled. And who serves death, monsieur? The kitchen or the conservatory? James said nothing. Poirot turned to Anna. Did you prepare Mr. Redwick's tea? No, sir. He poured it himself. From which pot? Anna blinked. There was only one. Precisely, Poirot said. And yet, only one man lies dead. That night, Poirot requested privacy in the drawing room. He laid out photographs he had taken of Redwick's position, the angle of the light, the curve of the orchid stems above his head. Then he drew something in his notebook, a grid, a pattern, a schedule. Because Poirot had noticed during the last 2 days that Redwick always left the dining room first, always rose early, and always read alone in the conservatory. Except this morning. This morning, Dr. Rhodes had arrived, and so had a letter, one Poirot had glimpsed briefly in Redwick's hand, bearing a royal blue seal and smelling faintly of tobacco. A letter now missing. The following morning, Poirot called the household together. We stand in a house, he began, where death moves like a cat, silent, unseen, but always watching. Lady Eleanor looked away. Charles Redwick did not die of fright or of fate. He died of certainty. Someone wanted him gone. But the question is not who hated him, for many had cause. The question is, what did he know? Richard Ashcombe said coldly, "This is ridiculous." Charles was a friend. Poirot's eyes flicked toward him. And yet you never explained what he was doing here. What was he financing, monsieur? Richard hesitated. He was helping me with the estate. But you do not need help. Styles' Edge is paid for. It is the future that troubled you, non? Beatrice stepped forward. This is absurd. Redwick had secrets, yes, but he also made enemies everywhere. He owed money to someone, I think. He was worried. I saw it. Ah, Poirot said. So he was afraid. Beatrice faltered. Yes. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And yet he died without a sound. A silence followed. Tense. Then Poirot turned to Dr. Rhodes. You are not a real doctor. Rhodes paled. You were struck from the medical register 6 years ago for theft. The man you once were, Nathaniel Rees, vanished. But Redwick knew you from your London days, and perhaps he threatened to expose you. Rhodes stepped back. That's not... Poirot raised a hand. It is true, but you did not kill him. Gasps. Poirot turned slowly toward James the butler. You did. James froze. No. Oh yes, Poirot said quietly. Because you also knew him. Years ago, when you were not a butler, but a clerk in the bank where Redwick worked. And he ruined you. Blamed you for an embezzlement he orchestrated. You went to prison. You changed your name. You built a new life here. James shook his head. That was long ago. But you never forgot. And when he walked through this door 3 days ago, you knew it would end in death. You poured the tea. The pot was not poisoned, only the cup, his cup. You used gloves to handle it, and you cleaned the tray after. James collapsed into a chair. He didn't even recognize. Poirot stood still. He died without a sound, because he never suspected. He never knew he was drinking from your revenge. A stunned hush fell. The truth was heavier than grief. Poirot stepped into the hall, the fire behind him, casting long shadows. So many deaths, he said softly. So much silence. But the soul, it remembers every footstep we take, even the ones we wish to forget. And in the dimness, the ticking clock kept time with his thoughts, each second marking the end of a perfect crime, heard only by the ears of justice. Chapter 4. The Widow who didn't cry. The rain came down like a final judgment, hard, cold, without mercy, drumming against the stained glass windows of the Ashcombe family chapel where the body lay. A whisper of thunder growled low over the moors, and yet inside the chapel, the silence was far more deafening. No wailing, no weeping, no sound at all from the woman dressed in midnight black who sat perfectly still in the front pew, her gloved hands folded neatly, her veil unlifted. The coffin, polished like a mirror, stood just feet away, yet the widow did not cry. Poirot observed her from the back, tucked behind a carved column where shadow and stained glass cloaked him in anonymity. His little grey cells stirred. Ah, but human nature, it never changes, he thought. The grief, it bends us, breaks us, swells in the throat like a tide. But when it does not come, when the tears do not fall, there is often something more than sorrow in the air. There is calculation. The deceased was Henry Talbot Ashcombe, younger brother to Richard, and once heir to a portion of the Styles Edge estate. Found dead in the hunting cabin just 3 days after Charles Redwick's mysterious passing, Henry's demise came with no violence, no visible wound, and no warning. A quiet man, a recently married man, and now a very quiet corpse. And the widow, Celeste Ashcombe, stood at the center of it all. Not once had she broken, not at the scene, not when questioned, and not now, seated before her husband's coffin, as though mourning was a task she had never been taught. When the service ended and the family dispersed, Poirot approached her slowly. The air smelled of lilies and candle smoke. The chapel doors creaked closed behind him. "Madame," he said gently, "may I offer my condolences?" She did not rise. Her voice, when it came, was calm as silk. "You may, though I'm not sure condolences change much, do they?" Poirot bowed his head. "No, madame, but truth changes everything." She looked up at last. Her eyes, beneath the veil, were bone dry. "Then perhaps you're not here to mourn at all." "I am always here to understand," Poirot said softly, "and I believe your husband would wish to be understood." Her lips twitched faintly. "My husband," she repeated. "Yes, he was kind, quiet, predictable. Yet he died in the hunting cabin, alone." "That's where he often went to be alone." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet he was not a solitary man. He was seen arguing with someone near the stables the day before his death." She stiffened. "I wouldn't know." "No, madame. But you did not ask me who." Celeste rose then, tall and poised. "Because I already know." Poirot studied her closely. She did not flinch. She did not tremble. But she was lying, not clumsily, not obviously, but in the way a spider waits in the center of its web. Still, but not at peace. Back at the manor, the air was thicker than ever with suspicion. Richard Ashcombe had withdrawn to his study. Lady Eleanor spent her hours walking the grounds in black lace, face pale and unreadable. Beatrice had taken to silence, and the staff moved like ghosts beneath the chandeliers. Poirot gathered the details quietly. From the groundskeeper, he learned that Henry and Richard had been discussing the division of the family estate, specifically a new clause in the will that would transfer power to Henry should Richard be deemed incompetent or compromised. And after Clara Caraway's death, that clause had become rather pressing. From Anna the maid, he learned that Celeste had received a letter 2 nights before Henry died, a letter she tore to pieces and burned in the drawing-room grate. Anna had swept the ashes herself, and from James, ever quiet, he learned that Celeste had not shared a room with Henry for over 3 months. Poirot stood once more in the hunting cabin, small, sparse, choked with the smell of old smoke and damp leather. A chessboard sat on the table, the game mid-play, and something clicked. Henry had played the white pieces, but the game began with a black pawn's move. Poirot leaned close. "So, someone else was here before you?" Someone set the stage. He examined the whiskey decanter. Full. But the glasses, one had a single lip print, no fingerprints. The other had been wiped clean. The scene was neat. Too neat. He examined the fireplace. The ash had been recently cleared, but one charred piece of fabric remained. Lace, delicate, black. He returned to the manor at dusk as the storm cracked across the moors and the lamps were lit against the growing dark. Poirot requested Celeste meet him in the drawing room. She arrived precisely on time. Her dress, again, was perfect. Not a wrinkle, not a drop of moisture on her shoes. She moved like a woman who had never run for anything in her life. "Madame," Poirot began, "you are very calm." "Is that a crime, Monsieur Poirot?" "It is not, but it is unusual." Celeste sat slowly. "You believe I killed Henry." "I believe, madame, that you did not love him." "That's hardly proof of murder." "No," Poirot said, "but it is motive." He let the silence stretch. Celeste narrowed her eyes. "Go on." "You married him for security, but he became inconvenient, especially when he refused to support the transfer of estate power to you after Richard's illness." "What illness?" "Ah," Poirot said, smiling. "You didn't know? Richard has begun suffering from tremors, a legacy of the war, no doubt. Henry was to act as steward if Richard stepped down, but that changed, non?" Celeste looked away. "You met someone else," Poirot continued. "Charles Redwick." She snapped back. He was charming, ambitious, dangerous, and he promised you a different life. But he could not fund that life alone. You needed the inheritance. Henry stood in your way, and so he had to disappear. You have no proof." Poirot held up the lace. "Your mourning veil burned in Henry's fireplace. You were there, the night he died. You poured him the drink. You played the first move, and you ensured it would be his last." "I didn't poison him." "No. You drugged him, quietly, slipped it into his whiskey. He fell asleep. You staged the scene, then wiped everything clean. Almost everything, but not the chessboard, not the veil, and not your absence of tears." She stood suddenly. "You think because I didn't cry—" "Madame," Poirot interrupted gently, "it is not the absence of tears I find damning. It is the absence of truth." She faltered. Poirot stepped forward. "You did not kill Redwick, but you feared he would betray you, and when he died, you mourned. Nothing, because you never loved either of them. You loved only the idea of escape." The room was silent again, heavy, final. Richard entered behind her, arms crossed. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. She turned, opened her mouth, then closed it. Poirot looked at Richard. She has confessed with her silence. Richard nodded once, then left the room without another word. Later, Poirot walked alone through the halls of Styles' Edge. The storm had passed, but the chill remained. In his notebook, he wrote a single line. "The heart breaks quietly, but the truth, when it finally falls, makes no sound at all." Chapter 5. His shoes were tied too tight. They found him sprawled in the cellar, head turned slightly as though he had been listening to something that had long since faded. The oil lamp above flickered its last, casting long, twitching shadows on the walls. The rope ladder still swung slightly from the trapdoor above, creaking softly with the echo of something gone. He was cold, dead, and silent, but not from violence. There were no marks, no bruises, no shattered bones or slit throats. Only one thing stood out. His shoes, patent leather Oxfords, were tied in precise, brutal double knots, cutting so tightly into his ankles that the laces had left imprints on the socks beneath. A strange detail, unnecessary. But murder, as Poirot often mused, is rarely tidy, even when the hands behind it try so very hard to make it so. Poirot arrived minutes later, umbrella dripping, his silhouette small, but composed as ever against the grey mist that clung to the house like cobwebs. He did not speak at first. He stood at the cellar door, eyes flickering from the ladder to the puddle forming under the victim, to the shoes that refused to remain quiet. "The dead, they are generous," he finally murmured. "They leave behind little gifts for those who listen." He stepped down slowly, the air thick with mildew and iron. The victim was Julian Edgewater, the family solicitor, trusted by Richard Ashcombe for years, yet never truly liked. A man of elegant dress, clipped words, and curious loyalty. He had been at Styles' Edge all week, ostensibly reviewing inheritance documents following Clara's passing and Henry's death. And now he, too, was dead. Quietly, oddly, Poirot examined the laces first. Tied too tight, yes, but more importantly, tied in a style that did not match Edgewater's usual manner. He had observed the man 3 times before this, at the chapel, at breakfast, in the study, and always Edgewater had worn a loose Windsor knot in his shoes, fastened efficiently, not excessively, and now the shoes looked like a message. Lady Eleanor arrived soon after, white as the morning fog. "Not another," she whispered, hand trembling as it touched the cellar frame. "Julian? But why?" Poirot did not turn. "That, madame, is what I intend to understand. But first, I must ask, was he left-handed?" She blinked. No, I don't believe so." "Then we have a problem," Poirot said quietly, "because these laces were tied by a left-handed individual." She drew in a sharp breath. "You think someone killed him here?" Poirot finally turned. "No, madame. I think someone killed him before he was placed here." Chaos spread quickly. Richard demanded answers. Beatrice locked herself in the music room. Dr. Rhodes, still lingering at the estate despite having no living patients, insisted on performing another examination, though Poirot denied him. The storm outside was rolling back in, and Poirot knew time was as slippery as the floor of the cellar. He began with the room. The lamp had not run out of oil. It had been snuffed. The table held an open briefcase, but not Edgewater's usual one. This was older, stiff, from the attic perhaps. Inside, blank parchment, a red wax seal, a ribbon, no legal documents, a decoy, a performance. Poirot climbed out of the cellar and requested to see the solicitor's room. There he found the true briefcase, locked. James, the butler, produced a small key Edgewater had given him in case of emergency. Inside, the real files, wills, letters, but also something else. A cheque, torn, written to cash, £50,000. Signed, but the signature scratched out violently. Poirot studied it, then smiled. In the drawing room that evening, the household gathered. The mood was brittle. Poirot asked his first question without preamble. "Who last spoke to Monsieur Edgewater?" "I saw him at supper," Richardy offered. "He seemed normal." "No," Eleanor said softly. "He was on edge. He kept tapping his pen. Wouldn't eat." Poirot nodded. "Did he leave anything behind?" "A coat," Anna said from the corner. "He forgot his coat in the foyer." Poirot's eyes lit. "Indeed." He fetched the coat himself. It smelled faintly of something floral, unusual for Edgewater. And in the inner pocket, something pressed between the lining. A single pressed petal. Violet. Poirot turned slowly to face them. "Violets," he said. "They grow only in the eastern greenhouse." Beatrice flinched. "You were there last night," Poirot said to her. "The groundskeeper saw someone exit the greenhouse in haste. A woman. He thought it was Celeste. But Celeste has not worn violet perfume since Henry died. You, mademoiselle, wore it last night." She spoke too quickly. "I was only... You were with Edgewater." Arguing. "Yes," she snapped, "because he blackmailed me." Gasps. Beatrice's hands clenched. "He knew about Charles, about the money I took from Richard's desk. I didn't mean to, but Julian found out and demanded silence for a price." "So you refused?" Poirot asked. "No, I agreed. I gave him the check, but then I tore it up. I told him I'd confess instead. I never saw him again after that." Poirot studied her. "That is the truth." Beatrice blinked. "You believe me?" "I believe you are too proud to beg," he said softly. "And Monsieur Edgewater died by the hand of someone who begged and was refused." His gaze turned then, slowly, to Richard. Richard's face had gone pale. "You and Edgewater," Poirot said. "You were more than client and solicitor. You were once friends, but he held your secrets. The offshore account, the missing estate funds. He covered for you, and then he asked for payment." "No," Richard said flatly. "He didn't." "He did. And when you refused, he threatened to destroy the family name, to turn over the files, to undo everything." Poirot stepped forward. "So you arranged a meeting?" "In the cellar. Private. Convenient. You tied the laces on his shoes, not because he needed it, but because you needed the appearance of self-harm. You made it look like he slipped, perhaps hung himself from the beam, even if the rope was missing. But you forgot. He never tied his shoes that way." Silence cracked like thunder. Lady Eleanor whispered, "Richard?" He said nothing. Then, finally, "I tried to scare him. Just scare him. But he fell. He hit his head. There was blood. I panicked. I wiped it. Hid the wound with the collar. Tied the shoes to make it look like something else." Poirot nodded sadly. "And you thought the shoes would distract?" Instead, they pointed. Richard lowered his head. Later, Poirot stood at the front door, watching as the constable cart arrived. Rain tapped softly against the cobblestones. The household was silent once again, and the truth, layered, ugly, final, hung in the air like smoke. Poirot whispered to himself, "It is always the small things. A knot, a petal, a lace. Murder is never loud. But the details, mon ami, they scream." Chapter 6. A painting was turned slightly. It began with the light, cold, angled, and cruel. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of the east drawing room at Styles' Edge, striking a glint off the glass of a frame that shouldn't have reflected anything. James the butler noticed it first, a sliver of shine, from the portrait of Lady Viola Ashcombe, long dead and longer mourned, hung above the grand fireplace. It was tilted, not much, barely a degree. But in this house, where nothing moved without intent, that slight imperfection screamed. He approached the frame, reached to adjust it, and froze. Behind it, hidden in the wall's shadow, was the jagged edge of plaster, freshly broken, still crumbling. Something had been removed, or perhaps hidden. Poirot arrived precisely 17 minutes later. He studied the scene without stepping forward, his eyes darting from the curve of the curtain tassels to the placement of the candelabra on the mantelpiece. Painting," he murmured. "It is like a mask. It hides, yes, but only what someone wishes not to be seen." His fingers tapped his cane once against the floor. "And yet this one, it reveals." Inside the wall cavity behind the painting, the constable uncovered a velvet pouch, aged, frayed at the seams, but unmistakably meant for secrecy. Inside it, a delicate brooch in the shape of a phoenix, crusted with old rubies and black pearls. Eleanor gasped when she saw it. "That belonged to Great-Aunt Mireille," she said faintly. "It was stolen 20 years ago." Poirot's eyebrows arched. "And now it returns, just when the house is torn apart by death." Lady Eleanor looked away. Beatrice spoke next. "Why hide it behind Viola's portrait? That's a place of honor." Poirot's gaze narrowed. "Precisely. The phoenix brooch was an heirloom of rare beauty and greater legend. It had disappeared during the fire at the North Wing decades ago, presumed destroyed. Its reappearance was not just suspicious. It was loud, intentionally loud. And in Poirot's experience, when a relic of the past rises from the ashes, it does not do so alone. He spent the rest of the morning in the drawing room, eyes raking every inch. He measured the frame hooks. He compared dust patterns across all other paintings. One had been moved, only briefly, then returned. The portrait of Alistair Ashcombe, the founder of Styles Edge. That painting, too, had been ever so, slightly off balance. And behind it, on the wallpaper, a faint smudge. Fingerprints, perhaps, or soot. Poirot requested that all members of the house remain nearby. He had questions, and as always, he knew that answers would come not from the loudest confessions, but from the smallest contradictions. First, he spoke to Dr. Rhodes, who had taken up residence in the Manor's West Wing, despite having no patient left to tend. "Why are you still here, monsieur?" Poirot asked lightly. "I'm assisting Lady Eleanor with her nerves," Rhodes replied. "These deaths, one after another, it's taking a toll." "Ah," Poirot said, "and yet her physician is in London." Rhodes didn't answer. Poirot's gaze dropped to his shoes, perfectly polished, but with a smear of dust along the outer sole, the kind found only in the sealed-off northern corridor. Next, he spoke to Beatrice. "Tell me," he said, "do you know where the household keys are kept?" "In the main desk drawer," she replied. "James controls them." "But James was seen in the village yesterday." Beatrice stiffened. "Then someone else had them." "Yes," Poirot said gently. "Someone who knew how to open the sealed wing." She hesitated. "I only went there once, years ago." "That is one more time than you told me yesterday." "I was scared. I didn't want to get blamed." Poirot said nothing, but he nodded to himself. Fear, not guilt. Important distinction. Finally, Poirot spoke to Richard. He found him in the gallery hall, standing beneath a portrait of his late father. Richard did not turn when Poirot approached. I didn't take the brooch. I know, Poirot said. Then what are you here for? I am here because someone moved that painting, monsieur. Someone who knew precisely what they wanted hidden. Richard turned slowly. What do you think it means? I think, Poirot said softly, it means the past has returned, and it brings with it a fire that did not die. That evening, Poirot requested a single candle be placed beneath the painting of Lady Viola again. He studied the way the shadows fell, how the frame bent the light ever so slightly. This, he whispered, is no accident. It is a message. He returned to the attic where the estate records were kept. After hours of dusty searching, he found it. A letter, written by Viola Ashcombe shortly before her death, addressed to someone she referred to only as M. The handwriting was elegant but urgent. They cannot have it. I have hidden it where only you will know. Behind my portrait, you are the only one I trust. And Poirot whispered, Mireille. The brooch was not stolen. It had been hidden. He returned to the drawing room and for the first time looked closely at the back of the phoenix brooch. Tiny script was engraved beneath the central ruby. Coordinates, not geographical, but dates, ledger codes, the family trust. It was not jewelry, it was the key to a fortune. Poirot called the household together. The fire crackled behind him, casting dancing shadows on the portraits above. We stand, he said, not at the end of this crime, but its beginning. The painting was turned slightly, not by mistake, but by desperation. Someone searched for this brooch. Someone who knew it was not lost, but buried. He looked to Dr. Rhodes. You were in the northern wing last night. I was not. Your shoes, monsieur. The dust tells the story. You went in search of the brooch. You knew what it meant. Rhodes clenched his jaw. And if I did? Then you are not the killer. You are the thief. Gasps. Poirot turned slowly. But the one who killed, who set the fire in the north wing 20 years ago, who tried to bury the truth under ashes. He looked at Lady Eleanor. She said nothing. Poirot walked toward her, gently placing the brooch in her palm. You found it once, didn't you? You hid it, because it proved that your husband had signed the trust not to you, but to Mireille. You lost everything, so you burned the past. But fire leaves smoke. Eleanor stared at the flames behind him. It was never about inheritance, Poirot continued. It was about legacy, power, and what we are willing to destroy to protect the illusion of control. Eleanor closed her fingers around the brooch. You cannot prove. I do not need to, Poirot said, because you already confessed. When you saw the painting turned, you did not ask who moved it. You asked, how much did they see? The room was silent. Poirot turned away. The storm outside had passed, but the sky remained grey. Later, alone, Poirot stood once more before the crooked painting. He did not straighten it. He simply whispered, Truth does not hang straight on the wall. It leans, just so, but when it leans, one must look behind it. Chapter 7. Everyone had a motive. The scream didn't last long, just a sharp, wet burst of sound that tore through the East Wing corridor like a knife, then fell into silence so dense it pressed against the walls. Poirot had been in the library when he heard it, head tilting gently, pen hovering just above the final word of his notes. A second later came the thunder of footsteps, Lady Eleanor's heels echoing down the hallway, followed by the crash of a shattered vase and the dull thud of someone collapsing. Poirot rose. not in panic, but with the quiet precision of a man who has already drawn the conclusion before the evidence dares to show itself. When he arrived, the others were already gathering, expressions of confusion, some genuine, some rehearsed, spreading across their pale faces like mist. The body lay in the linen closet, folded unnaturally, knees tucked beneath the chin, throat open in a brutal red smile. The white towels soaked crimson. His name was Felix. Dane, the estate accountant, meticulous, humorless, always watching. His death was grotesque, sloppy, emotional, not the work of a cold planner, and that, in itself, was the first clue. Poirot did not kneel. He stood over the scene with hands clasped, eyes narrowing slightly. There was something wrong here, something off, not just in the violence, but in the silence that followed. Not one person had spoken. They simply stared. It was as if every person in that corridor had seen something they expected. Ah, Poirot thought to himself, now it begins. When a man dies, and no one weeps, you must always ask not who wanted him dead, but who did not. James, the butler, stepped forward. I found him, monsieur. I was retrieving fresh linens for the upper rooms. Poirot's gaze did not move. And you opened the door to find this? Yes, just as you see it. Poirot's eyes drifted to the top shelf of the closet. A single folded sheet had fallen, not from use, but from being hastily replaced. Someone had searched this space. Recently, clumsily. Where is the murder weapon? Poirot asked quietly. Dr. Rhodes, who had somehow arrived just in time, shook his head. No knife, but the wound suggests a sharp, narrow blade, possibly a paper knife. Or a letter opener, Poirot added. Lady Eleanor flinched. It began again. The tension, the downward spiral of grief, laced with lies. Poirot had seen it before, but never quite like this. He called for the body to be moved, and then for the household to assemble in the red sitting room. There, in the heavy heat of the fireplace and the flickering candlelight, the faces stared back at him, tired, wary, every one of them holding something in. Poirot looked at them, then spoke calmly. Felix Dane is dead, brutally so, and it is my belief that this murder was not random, not impulsive, but inevitable, because Felix knew something about each and every one of you. Beatrice, arms crossed, rolled her eyes. That's convenient. The man's barely cold, and now you claim he's some omniscient threat? Poirot smiled faintly. Not omniscient, just observant, like myself. You see, mademoiselle, Felix kept records, diaries, not of numbers, but of secrets. He called them contingency notes, a ledger of leverage should the day come when he needed to protect himself. Richard spoke next. If he had such a list, where is it? Poirot's eyes glinted. Hidden. And someone tried to find it. That is why the closet was disturbed. But they did not find what they sought. And so, Felix had to be silenced. Permanently. Dr. Rhodes sat forward. So, you're saying what? That we all had a reason to kill him? Poirot's voice dropped to a murmur. Mais oui. Everyone had a motive. He turned to Lady Eleanor. You, madame, were once deeply in debt. Felix helped you conceal a series of private loans from your late husband. If that came to light, you would lose everything. She did not deny it. To you, Monsieur Richard, Felix was an obstruction. He discovered discrepancies in your overseas accounts. Embezzlement masked as estate renovations. Richard's face turned to stone. "Beatrice," Poirot said, "you were once caught stealing from the family trust. Felix covered it up, for a price, but now, with his death, your freedom is at risk. If the truth emerges, you lose your inheritance." She flinched. Poirot walked slowly to the window, drawing back the curtain just slightly to let the stormlight in. "And Dr. Rhodes," he continued, "you are no longer a practicing physician. Felix knew your credentials were forged, that your time here was a masquerade for something else, something criminal." Rhodes stood. "You have no proof." "But Felix did." Poirot turned, letting the silence boil. "So then," Beatrice said bitterly, "if everyone had a motive, how do you find the killer?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "By finding the one with too much motive, the one who feared not exposure, but destruction, the one who did not kill out of hate, but out of panic." He lifted a small object from his pocket and placed it on the table. A matchbook, from a rare cigar Felix smoked. One match used, and inside the cover, a name, scrawled hastily, almost burned out. "Celeste." Lady Eleanor gasped. "She's gone," James whispered. "She left this morning." "No," Poirot said. "She ran." Poirot explained. Celeste had discovered that Felix knew the truth, not about others, but about her. She was not who she claimed to be. Her marriage to Henry Ashcombe had been one of identity theft, orchestrated by a shadow family member long thought dead. Felix had found her birth records. The real Celeste perished in France during the war. This woman, this impostor, had assumed her name, her face, her place, and Felix had known. He confronted her, demanded she leave or be exposed. She had not intended to kill him, but when he refused her final plea, she had acted. The blade was his own, taken from his desk. She slit his throat with rage, but also desperation. She wiped the handle. She left the scene. But in her panic, she forgot the one clue he had left, the matchbook, the name. Her name. Poirot stood still now, all eyes fixed on him. The wind outside screamed across the moors like a warning long ignored. "She will be found," he said quietly, "and the truth will come with her." The room breathed as one, heavy and dark. Poirot stepped into the hallway, shadows falling around him like a velvet curtain. He looked once over his shoulder, then said aloud, though softly, "Guilt is rarely isolated. It spreads like ink across parchment, and where everyone has a motive, the truth lies in who cannot afford to let it live." And then, like the door of the manor itself, the case closed behind him. Chapter 8. The maid knew but stayed silent. The key turned in the lock with a faint metallic groan, and the door to the attic clicked open. Cold air swept past Poirot's shoes, heavy with dust and old secrets. Inside, the room smelled of mothballs and something older, something like forgotten grief. The light from his candle flickered across the room's interior, revealing a scattering of family trunks, a faded rocking chair, and a rag doll with its eyes stitched shut. But Poirot's attention did not fix on any of these. No, it caught instead on the single glass of water placed on the floor beside the window. Untouched, clear, and too recently filled, he did not move closer, not yet. Instead, he let the silence settle, the way a musician listens before striking the first note. It was not the glass itself that disturbed him. It was what the glass proved. Someone had been here, and that someone had waited, quietly, silently, just as they had done on the night of the murder. He descended the attic stairs without haste, the echo of his footsteps drifting softly down the narrow corridor. The manor was asleep, or at least pretending to be. Outside, rain painted long streaks against the leaded windows, and the grandfather clock in the hall ticked like a metronome set by dread. Poirot passed the servants' quarters. One door was ajar. Anna's. He stopped, then gently pushed it open. Inside, the small room was lit by a single oil lamp. Anna sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded neatly in her lap, as if she had been waiting for him. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak, but her eyes met his, steady and unreadable. "Bonsoir, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly. "You know why I am here." Anna gave the smallest of nods. "You saw something," he continued. "The night Clara Carroway died, the night Charles Redwick died, perhaps even before that. But you said nothing." She blinked. "It wasn't my place." Poirot's head tilted gently. "Ah, but that is where you are wrong, mon enfant. When murder walks freely through a house, everyone must choose a side. Silence, it is not neutrality. It is complicity." Anna's lip trembled then, just barely. "If I speak, someone else dies." Poirot stepped closer, his voice a whisper. "And if you remain silent, they all might." She turned away. He did not press. Instead, he left her there, in that small, trembling room, and returned to the drawing room where Lady Eleanor, Beatrice, Richard, and Dr. Rhodes had gathered, each of them like a thread unraveling from a once grand tapestry. He faced them with the calm gravity of a man preparing to conduct an autopsy, not on a body, but on truth itself. "There is a witness," he said simply, "someone who has seen what none of you admitted. She has not yet spoken, but the walls of Styles Edge, mes amis, they have begun to speak for her." Beatrice scoffed. "What now, Poirot? Will the furniture confess?" "No, mademoiselle." But a silver button found beneath the north stair did, as did the torn scrap of glove inside the dumbwaiter shaft, and the family photograph that was returned to the drawing room after being missing for weeks, slightly smudged with chimney soot. They stared at him, wide-eyed. Poirot continued. "Each item points not to guilt, but to fear. Someone has been moving through this house unseen, listening, cleaning, covering, and that someone, for all their care, has left behind a pattern." Richard stepped forward. "Are you saying Anna killed Clara? And Redwick? And Felix?" Poirot's moustache twitched faintly. "Non, monsieur. I am saying she watched someone else do it." A heavy silence followed. Poirot turned back toward the staircase, then paused, and she was not the only one who stayed silent. Later that night, Anna came to him. Her candle shook slightly in her hand as she stepped into Poirot's guest quarters, eyes filled with stormlight and resignation. "I'll tell you everything," she said. Poirot sat without a word. Anna took a deep breath. "It started the night Clara died. I was coming from the laundry. I saw Beatrice leaving the library, but Clara was still alive. I heard her voice, soft, angry. She was speaking to someone else. I didn't see who, but the voice that replied, it was male, calm, threatening." "Redwick?" She shook her head. "No, older, quieter, I think. It was James." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "I didn't think anything of it until Clara died. Then I saw James take something from her room, a letter. He burned it in the scullery." "And the others?" Poirot asked. "I saw Dr. Rhodes enter Felix's room the night before he died. They argued. I couldn't hear what about, but I found a syringe in the trash the next morning. I meant to bring it to you, but I was afraid. Of Rhodes? No, she whispered. Of Lady Eleanor. Poirot blinked. Madame Eleanor? Anna nodded. She knew about everyone, about everything. She called me into her room the night Charles died. She asked what I had seen. I lied. She said if I ever spoke, it would be my word against theirs. Poirot stood, slowly, deliberately. Merci, Anna. She placed the syringe in his hand. I'm sorry I waited so long. Poirot looked at her gently. To act late is better than not to act at all. The next morning, he summoned the household once more. The drawing room had become a theatre, and he, the master of final curtains, the rain had stopped, but the air was still damp, thick with waiting. Poirot began without flourish. There have been 5 deaths, and one more would have followed had Anna not chosen to speak. He turned to James. You confronted Clara because she discovered the rewritten will. She intended to tell Richard. You tried to scare her into silence. James looked down. Poirot turned to Dr. Rhodes. You injected Felix with a slow paralytic, hoping to retrieve the blackmail files before anyone found him. But you were interrupted, so you made the death look like a seizure. Rhodes turned pale. Then Poirot looked to Lady Eleanor. You orchestrated it all. You played them against each other. You knew their weaknesses. You knew when to press, when to threaten, and when to let others do your bidding. Eleanor did not deny it. Poirot approached. You were the spider in the web, but in your confidence, you forgot the maid, the girl you once dismissed as invisible. She saw you the night of Charles's death, leaving the study with the paper knife in your coat. You have no proof, Eleanor said. I do not need it, Poirot replied, because the one person you never feared has found her voice. Anna stepped into the room, and everything stopped. Later, as Poirot stood by the window, watching the police car drive down the long gravel path, he murmured, The silent ones, they are never truly voiceless. They wait, they endure, and when the time comes, they sing. Chapter 9. A Letter That Vanished at Dawn. The letter was gone. At precisely 6:23 in the morning, Anna entered the small writing room off the south corridor to begin her daily cleaning and found the stationery drawer half open, a single square of parchment, still fluttering on the floor like a white flag abandoned mid-war. The candle had burned low, little more than a knot of wax in a silver holder, and the seat by the writing desk was slightly askew, pushed back, not tucked, but the letter, the one Lady Eleanor had written in the early hours, sealed with her personal wax and placed atop the blotter with the clear instruction that it be sent without delay, had vanished, and with it the last clear trail of truth in a house already saturated with shadows. Poirot stood before the desk just an hour later, dressed immaculately in grey tweed, his hands folded lightly before him. He said nothing for a long while, only stared at the emptiness where the letter should have been. Ah, he finally breathed, the written word, so fragile and yet so powerful. To vanish a letter is to silence a confession but also to expose the hands that feared it most. His gaze lifted, sharp, already measuring the room as if it were a chessboard. By noon, the house was stirring with whispers. Lady Eleanor, pale and tight-lipped, refused to say to whom the letter was addressed. It was private, she told Poirot, personal. But Poirot was not so easily deterred. Madame, he said gently, in this house, nothing is personal. not anymore. Eleanor looked away, eyes flicking toward the staircase. Poirot noted it. Fear, not grief, and fear had a scent. He gathered the household. The mood was brittle, like a porcelain vase, already cracked, but still upright. Beatrice, arms crossed, remained close to the fireplace. Richard paced. Dr. Rhodes lingered at the back, as always, out of reach, but never far from the drama. James, the butler, served tea with too much ceremony, each movement precise, rehearsed. Poirot sat in the high-backed chair near the window and began, "This morning, something disappeared. Something delicate, something damning. A letter, written by Lady Eleanor, between the hours of 3 and 5. She wrote it in silence. She did not summon James to post it. She left it here, in this room, under candlelight. At dawn, it was gone." Dr. Rhodes raised a brow. "And what exactly are you implying, Poirot? That one of us crept in and stole it like a stage villain?" "We," Poirot said calmly, "and I intend to find out who." He stood and began to walk slowly about the room, fingers laced behind his back. "First, let us consider what that letter contained. Lady Eleanor will not say, but I believe she was ready to confess something. Not her own guilt, perhaps, but someone else's. She had begun to suspect, after the brooch, after Felix, after Redwick, that the rot ran deeper than she had allowed herself to believe. And so, she wrote a letter. To whom?" He paused. "I believe, to me." Gasps echoed lightly. Beatrice narrowed her eyes. "Then why didn't she just give it to you directly?" "Because fear is cowardly," Poirot replied. "It whispers in the dark, but quakes in the daylight." He turned his eyes to Anna. "You, mademoiselle, found the letter missing, but you also found the wax seal, the ash left in the candle dish. Someone burned it here, quickly, before breakfast." "Then it's gone," Richard said flatly. "Dead like the rest of this place." Poirot tapped his temple. "Non, monsieur. Ashes may fall, but the ink stains remain." Acting on impulse, he requested all the fireplace grates be cleaned. In the drawing-room hearth, among the soot, he found a half-melted seal, Lady Eleanor's crest, and beneath it, a corner of parchment not entirely scorched. On it, 2 letters remained, a capital M, followed by a lowercase e, me, or perhaps the start of a name. Poirot studied the handwriting, sharp, pressed. Then he asked a seemingly innocuous question. "Who in this house has the most to lose if Eleanor were to confess what she suspects?" "Everyone," Beatrice replied coldly. "True," Poirot murmured. "But who benefits most from her silence?" They stared at him. Poirot moved next to James the butler, who stood frozen at the back. "You are a man of routine. This morning, your records show you lit the hallway candles at 5. You entered this room at 5:30 to air it. Did you see the letter?" James's lips moved, but no sound came. "Non," Poirot said. "Or perhaps you did see it, and you left it untouched, only to return later." James swallowed. "I didn't take it." Poirot nodded. "But you know who did." Then he turned to Dr. Rhodes. "And you, monsieur, were awake early. I found your shoes wet, mud from the garden path, yet the rain did not begin until after sunrise. Where were you between 4 and 6? "I was in the greenhouse," Rhodes said, "trying to clear my head." "Then why did Anna find your gloves drying by the kitchen hearth?" He didn't answer. Beatrice exhaled. "This is pointless. If it's gone, it's gone." "Non," Poirot said again, "because something far more valuable than the letter remains." The silence. The silence you all built around yourselves like armor. He looked back to Lady Eleanor. But even armor cracks. That night, Poirot waited until the manor fell quiet. Then, as he had anticipated, footsteps creaked across the hall. He followed them, silent, patient, until they stopped in the writing room once more. There, in the low firelight, Lady Eleanor stood alone, a torn second letter in hand. Poirot stepped forward. "You wrote two," he said gently. "One for truth, one for protection." She didn't look at him. "Tell me," he said, "was it for Meadowcroft?" She looked up sharply. "That is the name. That began with me, we, a name buried long ago. A brother, a first husband, a son," she whispered. "Born in scandal, given away, raised elsewhere. I tried to erase him, but Clara, she found out, she threatened to expose it." "And the others?" Poirot asked. "Redwick was paid to keep quiet. Felix demanded more. I thought I could control it. I wrote the first letter to you, to end the game. But when I saw what it meant, I burned it. Then I wrote this one. A lie. For the police. For the world." Poirot's expression did not change. "And yet the truth has a way of surviving even fire." She turned to him. "What will you do?" Poirot said nothing at first. Then, finally, he replied, "I will leave this room, and I will give you until morning. Either the world hears your voice, or it hears mine." He stepped out into the corridor, closing the door behind him with infinite care. The next morning, Lady Eleanor was gone. Her room empty, her bed undisturbed. But on the writing desk, in her slanted hand, was a letter addressed to Inspector Braithwaite. Poirot did not open it. He didn't need to. Instead, he walked the garden path alone, the mist lifting gently from the grass. He murmured to himself, "It is always the letter they fear, not the pen. Because words, they endure what people cannot." Chapter 10. The alibi that cracked under pressure. The ticking of the grandfather clock echoed like a metronome of guilt across the marble-floored hall, each stroke louder than it should have been. The air was thick, heavy with late autumn fog that clung to the window panes like fingers trying to crawl back in. It was 11:03 p.m. when the glass shattered in the conservatory, not from a storm, not from a thrown stone, but from a body. Richard Ashcombe's, to be precise. And as he lay sprawled across a mosaic of broken stems and blood-speckled glass, one shoe missing and a half-buttoned coat tugged awkwardly across his frame. The last words he had ever spoken came back to Poirot with a particular sting. "You'll find no fault in my alibi, monsieur." And yet here he was, dead. And with that, the alibi he so confidently wielded became not a shield, but the blade that cut through every lie left standing in Styles' Edge. Poirot arrived moments later, summoned not by panic, but by the sound of the final fall. He took one look at the body, the unnatural position of the limbs, the angle of descent through the shattered glass, and whispered to himself, "Ah, so it ends not with a whisper, but with a collapse." He did not kneel immediately. He circled the scene like a hawk, measuring its prey, not the corpse, but the room. No signs of a struggle, no fresh footprints in the condensation beneath the plants, but a single trace, a smear of soot across the copper latch of the upper skylight, an escape route perhaps, or an entry point, but most likely a misdirection. Poirot did not yet know who had killed Richard Ashcombe, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The man's alibi was about to betray the person who gave it. By morning, the household was fractured. Lady Eleanor sat in the music room, silent and distant, fingers gently resting on a closed hymn book. Beatrice refused to leave the gallery, where a portrait of her father loomed over the fireplace like a silent judge. Anna had locked herself in the linen room, and Dr. Rhodes had retreated to the stables to smoke and shake. Poirot, calm as always, stood before the fire with his hands behind his back and addressed them all. Last night, Richard Ashcombe died, not by chance, but by calculation, he said. And to understand his death, we must revisit something he once considered untouchable: his alibi. The room barely breathed. Poirot paced slowly. 3 nights ago, when Charles Redwick died, Richard claimed he was in the wine cellar from midnight to past. He was not alone. James the butler confirmed he was with him, reviewing inventory. And yet, when I asked James to recount the types of wines discussed, he could not name one. Not one, mes amis, because the meeting never happened. The cellar was locked that night. I found the key in Anna's apron the next morning, where she'd kept it, unaware it had been stolen the night before. James sputtered. But he told me to say. Poirot raised a hand. Just so. Richard asked you to lie, not to protect him from guilt, but to distance him from suspicion. He did not kill Redwick, but he knew who did, and that made him dangerous. A murmur rippled through the room. Poirot turned to Beatrice. You were the last to see Richard alive. You said you passed him on the stair at 10, that he was headed to the library. I did, she replied, too quickly. We spoke, briefly. About what? Family affairs. The estate. Poirot stepped closer. And yet, mademoiselle, in the library I found no recent ash in the grate. The room was untouched, the decanter still sealed. But the conservatory, where he fell, had 2 glasses set on the edge of the table. One had fingerprints. Yours. Beatrice's face turned pale. He asked me there. He said he needed to talk about the will. Indeed. And did he mention the letter? What letter? The one Lady Eleanor burned. The one that revealed the truth of her son, Meadowcroft. Beatrice faltered. He knew. Poirot turned toward the hearth. Richard learned everything, and so he became a liability. Are you accusing me? Beatrice whispered. No, Poirot said softly. You were there. You left him. But he was still alive when you did. He turned to the others. There is someone in this room who gave Richard a false sense of safety. Someone who let him believe the truth would never reach the surface. That person was Dr. Rhodes laughed bitterly. Me? Please, Poirot. I was miles from the house. You were in the stables. That is not miles. And I found your coat, still damp, near the conservatory door. More importantly, I found this. He produced a fragment of parchment, retrieved from Richard's coat pocket. The handwriting was shaky, but legible. It read, he knew. Said he would go to the inspector in the morning. Poirot continued. You feared that your past, your identity, your forged license, your connection to Charles Redwick would all come unraveled. And when Richard learned that, he threatened to expose you. So you lured him to the conservatory, told him you needed to talk privately, and then... I didn't kill him, Rhodes snapped. He fell. Non, Poirot said. He was pushed. The angle of descent, the position of his coat, and the bruising on his collar indicate hands, not gravity. But there is more. Lifted a second piece of evidence. A button, bloodied and torn from Rhodes' coat. I found this in the vines below the window. Rhodes looked at it and said nothing. Poirot straightened. When you kill to protect a secret, you only tighten the noose around yourself. And when your alibi is built by another man's lie, all it takes is one pressure point, and it collapses. The silence that followed was long and cold. Eleanor closed her eyes. Beatrice looked away. And Rhodes just sat down. Later that night, Poirot stood alone in the conservatory, staring at the broken glass glittering like ice across the floor. The moon had risen, a pale, indifferent eye in a sky too old to care. He whispered to himself, "Alibis are like glass. They protect, they reflect, but they shatter when stepped upon too hard." Chapter 11. The killer's mistake was beautiful. The rose was out of place. Just one, tucked delicately into the fold of a blood-stained handkerchief, resting atop the cold chest of the deceased. A pale ivory bloom, soft as breath, unopened. It did not belong to the gardens of Styles Edge, where only deep crimsons and sun-bruised golds flourished under the moor's grey skies. No, this rose had been trimmed, manicured, and brought from somewhere else. Somewhere that believed in perfection. The body beneath it, James, the butler, lay crumpled beside the grand staircase, a twisted marionette collapsed in mid-step, one gloved hand still clutching the lower banister. And in the stillness of that hour, before dawn had scattered the mist, Poirot said only one thing. Ah, such artistry, such symmetry, and yet this is where the murderer failed. He moved not toward the corpse, but the flower. He leaned in, inhaled, and smiled faintly. Gardenia, not rose, imported, trimmed, placed. Someone wanted beauty, not chaos. He turned to Anna, who had discovered the body. She stood pale against the wallpaper, eyes wide, hands shaking, but silent. "You see, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, "when a killer thinks in flourishes, they leave behind the truth not in the blood, but in the arrangement." Lady Eleanor arrived moments later, her robe still buttoned unevenly. She knelt beside James with an audible gasp. Who would do this? He was loyal. He knew everything. "We," Poirot said calmly, "and perhaps that is exactly why he is now silent." By noon, the house was sealed. No one in, no one out. Not even the birds seemed to stir beyond the hedges. Inside, a gathering of shadows unfolded across the manor as Poirot summoned the household into the drawing room. The fire crackled, but gave no warmth. James was killed not for what he did, but for what he knew, Poirot began. His murder was not a moment of rage. It was a composition, deliberate, delicate, but as with all art, even the most beautiful contains a flaw. And this, he said, lifting the gardenia, was it. Dr. Rhodes leaned forward. "You're basing a murder accusation on a flower?" "Non," Poirot replied smoothly. "I am basing it on where the flower bloomed." He turned to Beatrice. "Do you recall the glass house in the south courtyard? The one no one uses?" "It's locked," she said. "Has been for years." "Precisely. And yet this morning, I found boot prints in the dew outside its door, smaller than mine, more narrow, feminine." He looked at Anna. Her face froze. "Do not be afraid," Poirot said gently. "You did not place the flower, but you saw who did." Anna's voice cracked. I saw Lady Eleanor last night. She was in the courtyard. I thought, maybe she was just walking." Lady Eleanor stood. "This is nonsense. James was loyal to me. I had no reason." Poirot raised a finger. Forgive me, madame, but that is not entirely true. James kept records, not just of finances or guest arrivals, but of what he overheard. And in one such record, which I found hidden in the wine cellar beneath the broken ledger cabinet, he noted that Lady Eleanor was seen speaking to a stranger. A week before Clara died. She paled. You went through my cellars? I go where the truth leads me. The stranger, known only as M, was a visitor none had seen, because he entered through the servants' gate. Poirot produced a small leather wallet found in James's jacket. Inside, a folded note addressed in a fine masculine hand. She is faltering. Secure the inheritance. Act soon. I believe, Lady Eleanor, Poirot said, that your long-lost son, Meadowcroft, has returned, but not to reunite, to collect. And James found out. The room erupted. Beatrice gasped. Rhodes muttered a curse. Anna covered her mouth. Eleanor did not deny it. You were ashamed, Poirot continued. You buried his existence. But when your secrets began to surface, when Clara began asking questions, when Redwick learned too much, when Felix discovered the old trust documents, your house of silence began to shake. Tears touched Eleanor's lashes. I didn't kill James. No, Poirot said softly, but Meadowcroft did, and you covered for him. Then he turned. Come in, he called, and from the hallway stepped a man none recognized, save for Anna, whose eyes widened, tall, lean, a cruel mouth, dressed in morning clothes, too neat. Meadowcroft. Poirot nodded. You arrived under a false name, a courier, a solicitor. You used different faces with each. You played the house like a stage. But last night, when James caught you leaving the glass house with this flower in your pocket, you panicked. You silenced him. But you could not resist the final stroke. The gardenia. It was your pride. Your mistake. Meadowcroft scoffed. You can't prove I was there. Poirot handed him a glove. Yours? Found beside the bench where James was struck. He did not take it. Police footsteps echoed in the corridor. Lady Eleanor closed her eyes. Poirot turned once more to the fire. It is always the final touch, he murmured. The elegance, the flourish. The killer paints a picture so carefully, only to sign it in blood. Chapter 12. Poirot reveals what none could see. The candle flickered, then died. Not from wind, not from movement, but from something subtler, like the house itself, exhaled at last, tired of holding its secrets. The drawing-room sank into a hush so profound, even the fire dared not crackle too loudly. At the center stood Hercule Poirot, his back straight, his eyes reflecting the warm amber light like dark glass. Around him, Lady Eleanor in silent mourning, Beatrice stiff as a sculpture, Dr. Rhodes with twitching fingers, Anna near tears, and the stranger, Meadowcroft, lurking just beyond the firelight, half shadow, half revenant. It had all led to this moment. 12 bodies, 12 shadows. 12 chapters of silence, deceit, and delicate murder. And now, at last, the final truth, poised on the brink of revelation. You must listen carefully, Poirot began softly, because what I am about to reveal will undo everything you thought you knew. The clues were never hidden, Miss Amos. They were simply not understood. That is the curse of the obvious. It disappears in plain sight. He took one step forward. You think this began with Clara Carraway. But the first death was long before that. The first true death was that of Viola Ashcombe, whose portrait still hangs in the East Corridor. She died in the fire, or so we were told, but no body was ever recovered, no remains, only ash, jewelry, and a lock of hair. But what if she did not die? He turned to Eleanor. What if she was made to disappear? Lady Eleanor blinked. What are you suggesting? Poirot folded his hands. I am suggesting that your marriage to Alistair Ashcombe was not as lawful as it seemed. Viola never died. She escaped, and her child, her true heir, was smuggled away in the confusion. That child, raised under another name, grew into a man you all met recently. You called him Meadowcroft. The room recoiled. His return was not coincidence. It was vengeance. He wanted what had been stolen. His name, his inheritance, his mother's dignity, but he was not the killer. Not alone. Poirot's voice darkened. He was the blade, but someone else guided his hand. He stepped slowly toward the hearth. Let us speak of the brooch, found behind Viola's portrait. Placed there, not by accident, but by someone who knew where she had hidden it decades ago. That person was not Clara, not Redwick, not even Eleanor. It was James. Anna gasped audibly. Yes, Poirot nodded. James was Viola's cousin. He knew her handwriting. He preserved her letters in secret. He remained silent all these years, waiting. When Meadowcroft returned, it was James who told him the truth. But James made a mistake. He loved the family that betrayed his blood. So he tried to control the return, tried to temper Meadowcroft's fury. He failed. That was why he died. He turned toward Beatrice. And you, mademoiselle, you were not blind to this. You saw Meadowcroft searching the glass house. You helped him, not out of sympathy, but ambition. You believed aligning with the rightful heir would restore your standing. Beatrice opened her mouth, then shut it. Poirot continued. But when Felix Dane was killed, it was not Meadowcroft. It was Doctor. Rhodes froze. That's absurd. No, Poirot said sharply. You feared exposure. You forged documents. You used Felix's silence as a shield. But when he discovered your secret, that you were not a doctor, but a defrocked surgeon wanted in Belgium, you panicked. And you killed. You made it look clean. Professional. But you forgot the syringe. Poirot raised it, the one found in the waste bin behind the kitchen pantry. You wrapped it in a linen napkin from the upper dining room. A rare cloth, monogrammed. Only 2 remain in the house. I found the other in your private wardrobe. Dr. Rhodes stepped back. Poirot turned to Anna next. You, my dear, saw too much. You saw Eleanor burning a letter. You saw Beatrice hand off a package to Meadowcroft. You saw James slip into the chapel at night. And yet, you said nothing. Why? Tears brimmed in her eyes. I was afraid. Poirot gave a gentle smile. Courage is not born from fearlessness. It is born from knowing the cost, and speaking anyway. Now, finally, Poirot turned to Eleanor. But none of them would have succeeded without you, madame. Eleanor's breath caught. You created this house of silence. You buried the truth about Viola. You forged the death certificate. You bribed the coroner. You denied your stepson his name. You used Beatrice's debt. You used Rhodes's past. And when it all began to unravel, when Clara grew too curious, you let her die. Eleanor whispered, I didn't kill her. No, Poirot agreed, but you gave permission. The silence was absolute. Then Poirot said, but the true twist, mes amis, the true cruelty, is this. Viola never died. She returned. Years ago, She lived among you as someone else, as someone everyone overlooked. He turned to Anna. She stared, lips parted, frozen. Poirot's voice lowered. Viola was your mother. The room exploded into stunned gasps. Poirot explained. She survived the fire, escaped to Belgium. She raised Anna in secrecy. She returned to Styles Edge when Anna was old enough to work. As a maid, unseen, invisible. She watched this family flourish on lies. And then she died, quietly, of illness, and no one noticed. Anna fell to her knees. Poirot bent toward her, whispered, "She saw all, and she waited for you to see it too." The clock struck midnight. Poirot stood alone now, his silhouette long in the firelight. He turned once more to the room, voice soft but absolute. In the end, the murderer left no fingerprints, but she left a legacy of silence. And silence, mes amis, speaks louder than confession. Then he stepped into the hall, his cane tapping once on the polished floor, and was gone.